Hey beer geeks, welcome back to the Craft Beer channel and welcome back to the beer shop in Hitchin.
Beautiful.
It's a beautiful space with beautiful beers, and it's also where we filmed our big in 2022, so our rundown of the trends and the breweries that we think will have a great 12 months. And one of the things that we mentioned within that video was the Pastry Sour.
Pastry Sours, Johnny.
If I'd have said that to you 10 years ago, that this was the way that craft beer was going, Pastry Sour would be a big thing, what would you have said?
I would have laughed in your face.
Right.
I probably would have chucked my West Coast IPA at you. How dare you?
So yeah, I mean, back then you probably wouldn't know what a pastry sour is. So the term pastry was actually coined by Don't Drink Beer, which is it's an amazing website, social media
Did he coin that?
profile. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Shut up.
Alex.
Are you serious?
Yeah, 100%.
I don't know about that.
So it's an amazing kind of satirical beer review website. He loves barley wine, he loves proper imperial stouts, and I think it's fair to say he hates most of craft beer culture. So he talked about pastry beers as being beers that are closer to pastry/pudding than they are actual beer. And he was talking about pastry stouts, which we probably know about by now, heavily adjuncted, very sweet, big imperial stouts.
Yes.
Well, now we have the pastry sour, which takes that adjunct approach, probably the lactose, and puts it in a sour beer.
Why not?
I mean, there's lots of reasons why not, Bradley. But when it's done right, it can be delicious. And so today we're going to be going through this very delicious pastry stout, and then perhaps where they've come from and what on earth has happened to the original styles that inspired them.
So these are massive in America already, right?
Exactly,
We're probably
yeah.
preaching to the converted.
I mean, they're so big that you
Yeah.
know the whole hard seltzer trend?
Yeah.
There's now pastry seltzers.
Shut up.
Yes. Well, let's talk about this beautiful beer, because this is where we think pastry sour can go right.
Yes.
So this is from Dig, wonderful brewery up in the Midlands. And this is, so they're saying it's a sour ale brewed with Himalayan salt and conditioned with raspberries and vanilla.
Sounds fit, doesn't it?
It does sound pretty good.
Himalayan sea salt.
So that's the pink
pink
delicious salt. We were in a Himalayan pink
Dude.
salt sauna
In Norway.
where
Arctic
they
Norway.
literally pelted pink salt at us.
We were literally, they built, all of the bricks were built out of Himalayan sea salt.
Yeah.
And they had this sort of mad, I guess, would it be like an air conditioner sort of system? Almost like a snow
Salt
blower.
conditioner system.
Snow blower that just blew salt everywhere.
It's very weird. You
We
couldn't
drank-
look at it. Never look at
Don't
a
look directly at
salt-based
the salt blower.
Yeah.
But we drank a load of wine that night in there, I seem to remember. And they.
You remember better than me then.
It was very mood lighting, wasn't it? It was quite sexy.
Yep. Anyway.
We were next to, they had a carp pool, didn't they? Where they were doing
Oh
sort
my
of
God,
like
I forgot about the carp
indoor
pool.
carp.
Did we film any of this, or is it a fever
No.
dream?
But what we learned was Himalayan sea salt.
Yeah.
It's not sea salt,
Wait,
it's just
what do you
Himalayan
mean?
salt.
That's not something we learned. That's just a sentence. We learned Himalayan pink salt.
I don't think the sea is in the Himalayas. I don't think there's any sea there.
I don't think I think it's chiseled from caves.
Yeah, there's no sea there.
No.
It's Himalayan cave salt.
Anyway, we're a beer channel. So we are drinking this beautiful Dig pastry sour. So it's got vanilla. I think a pastry sour, it's got to be heavily adjuncted, and it's got to be much sweeter than, say, a traditional Berliner Weisse and a
Yes.
Gose, which we're going to get into in a minute. So tell me about this beer. Tell me what you think.
I love the colour for a start. It's incredibly well-rounded.
Yeah.
You know, when I think pastry sour, I think wacky.
You don't expect balance.
No, I think it's going to be super sharp, super extreme. This tastes quite pure, really. It tastes like I'm drinking actual juice, like sharp juice.
It's exactly that sharp raspberry juice. To me,
Yeah.
it's like a raspberry yogurt, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
vanilla adds a tiny bit of sweetness. There's no lactose in this,
No.
so the vanilla brings the sweetness, the raspberry brings the really fruity, smoothie vibe, and then the acidity they've got through the quick souring process.
Balanced.
Yogurt balances it out, and then that salt is so lovely as well because it's really moreish, really refreshing. It's a beautifully made beer that completely pisses over tradition, but in a really fun way, and I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, man.
So this is where pastry sour can go so right. Once it gets really smoothie-led, really thick, really sweet, you add lactose, you start to lose that balance, you start to get away from actually tasting like beer. And I'm not usually one to say beer should taste like beer. I think beer can taste like anything. But once you lose that sense of either acidity or bitterness,
Yes.
you're moving very much away from what you'd expect from a beer, and
Yes.
from a sour beer. But what's really interesting is that use of salt, that use of the quick souring, are two incredibly traditional things that are being used in these very modern beers to get that balance, to get that refreshment. So now we're going to look at two different beers. One's a Gosa, one's a Berliner Weisse, and both of them have pastry elements. But we're going to see the differences between the two so that you, when you're shopping or when you're in the bar, you can pick out the kind of thing that you want. Because those two beers, despite being German, despite being North German, despite being sour, despite having potentially adjuncts in them, are very, very different. So let's start with the Berliner Weisse. It's a slightly less complicated style, although the way that first Weizsäck have done it, it's no longer a very simple style. So this is a Berliner Weisse with peach, passion fruit, vanilla, milk sugar.
Milk sugar?
Milk sugar, lactose.
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 Yeah.
But while that's not traditional, this is actually a brewery from Berlin.
Okay.
So we've got that at least in the bank of traditionality. So the Berliner Weisse is a style that is, it's a sour beer style, a sour wheat beer.
Yes.
Which would have been made, originally it would have been mixed fermentation. It would have been a beer that was sour by nature, by natural inoculation, by those wild yeasts and bacteria getting in, and probably would have had some Brett character as well. Along the years, as brewers got more adept at controlling what yeasts go in, controlling the fermentation temperatures, it became a quicker sour. And nowadays, you either pitch lactobacillus in, or you use a yeast that produces lactic acid, like we did when we did our sour homebrew.
Yes.
So nowadays it's seen as a quick sour, but originally it definitely wouldn't have been. And there's no actual real adjuncts in a Berliner Weisse other than wheat, if you count that as an adjunct. Depends how technical you be.
Yeah.
So it should be a clean, lemony, fresh, and lightly acidic beer at a very low ABV. That's the idea of the
Beautiful.
Berliner Weisse.
Great summertime drinking beer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, obviously, traditionally you'd add peach, passion fruit, milk sugar, and vanilla.
Of course. Ooh. Ooh.
It's a big smelling beer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, this one's 6%, so they haven't stuck to that, and that's why we're getting so much aroma.
Yeah.
Loads and loads of peach, but also a slight kind of drier character. I'm not getting much vanilla. But the important thing about this is that was a big, funky, jammy smell. This one's a bit cleaner, lighter, fresher, peachy.
Peach schnapps vibes.
Peach schnapps, definitely peach schnapps vibes.
Yeah. You can taste that milk sugar, that lactose kind of thing going on.
You've got the vanilla and the milk sugar, so there's
Yep.
always going to be a kind of, almost like white chocolate kind of vibe to it.
Yeah. It's almost, it's on the verge of being sickly sweet almost, a little bit.
It is. But in comparison to that, which has a big sour finish and a big salty finish, even though it's in balance, this, the finish is lightning quick.
Yeah.
It doesn't stick around. So it's a big heady punch. It's much sweeter, but it dies away a lot quicker. And that's kind of where a Berliner Weisse should sit. It should be refreshing, gluggable, lighter. And maybe they've slightly overdone the milk sugar. And I think that's kind of well done. It's not my kind of beer, but it's well done. And we're going to see a very, very different kind of flavour when we get on something that's a true Gosa. Because then we're getting salt, we're getting coriander, and we're getting probably slightly higher levels of acidity.
Oof.
So now we move to the Gosa. It's another North German beer style. It comes from a place called Goslar.
I see what they did there.
Exactly. And the story is that this beer is salted.
Yes.
And it's salted because the water in Goslar was a bit salty.
brackish.
Brackish. So that added an element of salinity to the beer, which they then embraced. So it was going to be sour mixed firm. Again, like Berliner Weisse, it would have originally been mixed firm. Slowly we've reined that in and kept the lemony character, got rid of the bretty and the other stuff that might have been in there. But they've kept that salty character. And in addition, they've added coriander. And when we say coriander, we mean coriander seed.
Right.
So it's kind of spicy, it's earthy, but it also, coriander has some similarities to hops in terms of the actual chemicals that are in there.
Okay.
So actually you can add coriander to an IPA and kind of enhance that juiciness. So it's a really interesting thing to add to beer. And on top of that, again, we've got some Himalayan pink sea salt. Not sea salt, not sea salt. It's from the Himalayas. There's no sea by the Himalayas. So let's give this one a go. So this one is from Pahala, one of our favourite breweries. Amazing adjunct stout brewers. So hopefully their pastry sours are going to be just as good. They've added orange to this one.
We know these guys are like super in touch with nature.
They are.
And using real ingredients.
Foraging for spruce tips, wasn't it? The beer that we had with them when we did our live show. So I'm expecting this to be really well balanced, lots of citrus character from that orange that they've added, and then hopefully a really traditional base underneath. And that's a lovely light looking, I mean, that looks refreshing, doesn't it? It
Hell
looks
yeah.
like an unfiltered lager or something. That's what I want from my sours. I want refreshing. And loads of orange juice, orange peel, everything there. And a kind of heady, spicy coriander note.
Big time.
Not getting much salinity from it. It's
No.
not the smell of the sea, which we
No.
had a little bit with that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more heavily salted. Let's give it a go. It's amazing the difference that a bit of salt can add. So a lot of beers will have salt added just to get the water balance right. But you tip past this certain point in the salt additions and it becomes incredibly moreish.
I think for Germans, you could almost skip the salted pretzels with this bad boy.
Just have an unsalted pretzel
Yeah.
and keep the salt in the beer. I mean,
Perfect.
we think of drinking salt as being incredibly unpleasant, but I love that kind of salty tang on the finish. It's almost like replacing the hot bitterness with salinity.
It's very moreish. It's a different zone in your mouth, isn't it? You're not expecting to get hit when you're drinking a beer. So it's unexpected, and it's kind of amazing, right?
Yeah, it's like when with hoppy beer, it hits you at the back at the end. You get a kick here and a kick down your throat. When it's salty, it's almost on the tip of the tongue. Like Haribo Tang Fastics, it's like the whole of your mouth is alive. And
Great stuff.
it's super exciting. I feel like my heart rate has lifted a little bit. God damn it, I think I love pastry sour.
So for me, the wonderful thing about all of these beers is they're incredibly well balanced, which I think when we think of pastry, we think of extreme. We think of jingle jangly nonsense, not nonsense, but kind of like...
No, I think nonsense is a good word.
Yeah.
We should embrace the nonsense. We should be
Yeah.
like, it's pastry, it's going to be silly.
Yeah.
But you
it-
could do it with balance.
You can do it with balance. I think pastry sours is actually a really good idea because sours on their own can be a bit extreme for non-sour drinkers, people that are not used to that acidic quality. So there's something about it can rein it back in a little bit, make it a little bit more rounded, a little bit more approachable somehow.
What I also love about Gosas, and what I loved about these two beers over this beer because of the salt, is structure. So what I look for in every beer that I drink is loads of aroma, a refreshing, light kind of feel on your tongue, and then a big finish. I think beer always has to have a big finish because that's what makes it really moreish and drinkable. And that beer was slightly lacking it. These two, you finish it, you get that moreish, salty
Kind of want to dive
vibe,
back in,
and
yeah.
Exactly, you want to go straight back in, and that's what makes beer so pintable, so drinkable, unlike a wine where the idea is you sip at it and you wait for the flavours to kind of develop and to fade, and then you take another sip. This is like another, and again, and again, and again.
So
and that's what I love about Gose, that structure.
Salinity is a little bit like crispness, isn't it?
Yeah,
In a way, it does a
Oh, yeah.
similar sort of thing where you just want to go, yeah, I need to drink a bit more of that now.
yeah. I think a great beer has to finish like a big finish, and it can be bitterness,
Yeah.
it can be sourness, crispness, it can be funk, it can be breattiness or something like that, or dryness, which
Yeah.
the Brett will bring, or it can be salinity. It can be that drying, salty finish that brings you in for another sip. But structure is super important, and that's what I think a lot of pastry stouts and pastry sours kind of lack. And a Gose is a great way of finding out, and these two breweries have nailed it with the Himalayan pink salt. Who knew we'd do a video where we talk so much about the Himalayas?
I mean, I am wearing,
You're dressed to go.
I'm ready.
You ready to go?